Welcome back. Over the past week or so, we've been talking a lot about the nearly $2 trillion COVID relief bill and digging around to show how the new law will help different segments of Americans. We've already spoken with someone about how it expands Obamacare, and tomorrow night, we're going to speak with a small business owner. Tonight, though, we focus on the middle class and how the law's benefits will help tens of millions of Americans who are struggling. And just today, we got a new read on just how badly COVID has slammed the jobs market. Nearly 800,000 Americans applied for jobless benefits for the first time, and that was just last week. That is a stubbornly large number. Plus, 12 million people in the U.S. are currently collecting some form of unemployment benefits from Uncle Sam. But help is on the way. 90 million people have already received their stimulus payments, totaling some $240 billion. And a slew of tax benefits and credits will also put more money into people's pockets. Joining us to discuss that aspect of the program is Marc Goldwein. Marc is the Senior Policy Director for the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Marc, whenever we discuss issues related to the middle class like we're about to, I'm reminded just how vague that term really is, and that far more people on both ends of the income spectrums think of themselves as middle class. So let's start there. When we discuss the impacts of the stimulus and other policies on the middle class, who are we talking about?
That's the million-dollar question. I think, as you said, there are people making $400,000 a year that consider themselves middle class, and people making $20,000. Of course, the actual folks that are, say, in the middle 50% are more like the $40,000 to $100,000 range. But who are we to decide, politicians, how to describe their voters?
So when it comes to the impact of the stimulus on the middle class, let's start with the direct payments, the stimulus checks, the dependent benefits, child tax credits. We know that they're gained to reduce in terms of what they give people above a certain income level. So is the middle class going to see less direct stimulus money?
Well, I think a reasonable definition of the middle class, that's families below $150,000, is going to see that full $1,400 per person check, right? And that's on top of $600 earlier this year. So a family of five making $148,000 might walk away with $10,000 of rebates this year. If you're sort of maybe what we consider upper middle class, people making in the 170, 200, 300,000, those folks won't see those rebates.
Beyond the direct payments and rebates, what else is in the bill, now law, that benefits the middle class, and especially things that people might not be as aware of?
Sure. So broadly speaking, the bill is going to strengthen the economic recovery, and that's going to benefit everyone. We're going to have a faster jobs recovery. There's going to be more spending, more business profits. So middle class is going to benefit broadly. But in terms of direct payments to the middle class, the other big area besides rebates is these tax credits. The bill increases the child tax credit from $2,000 up to $3,000 or $3,600 for young kids. It also dramatically expands the child care tax credit. So a family, which before could collect only $600, now can collect up to $8,000 of tax credits against their child care. And it expanded, actually, Obamacare so that it offers subsidies to middle and upper middle class families that are buying on the individual market.
So, Marc, once you factor in the direct benefits to the middle class and those indirect benefits to the middle class, how does the middle class benefit from the Biden stimulus compared to those from the Trump and Obama stimulus bills, or even the Trump tax cuts?
Well, I think this is the largest in terms of direct payments, total direct payments out to the middle class. But what most middle class families really care about, I think, more than getting cash for, a one-time check, is the overall state of the economy. Do they feel secure in their jobs? If they've lost their job, are they going to get it back? Are they going to see wage growth? And I think going back to the CARES Act last March, that bill was hugely important from preventing us from potentially going into a depression and really getting us to where we are today. And this bill is just going to keep carrying that water until hopefully enough of us are vaccinated that the economy is going to return back to normal.
Will the impact of this bill actually help close the income and wealth gaps between the middle class and the top end, or is this really just more emergency assistance and recovering what got lost over the past year?
I think in the near term, it is going to close some income gaps. particularly between those that have lost their jobs, in the middle class and the wealthy. Over time, it's not clear. The expanded child tax credit is somewhat progressive, and so that'll help lower income and middle class more. But overall, it's not clear if, we end up in a situation with a bit higher interest rates, a bit higher inflation. It's not really clear whether wealth inequality expands or contracts.
What about interest rates and inflation? I've heard some concern about them. I've heard other people dismiss those concerns. Where do you fall?
I think we're definitely going to see a higher level of inflation and higher interest rates as a result of this bill. We already are. The question is it too much? Is it out of control? The Federal Reserve thinks no. They think we're going to see one year of somewhat elevated inflation, maybe 2.5% this year, and then things are going to return to normal. If that happened, that would be no big deal. Of course, it might be important to individual families, but overall, it would, if anything, be desirable. The risk here is, what if that starts to run out of control? What if 2.5 becomes 3, becomes 3.5, and the Fed either loses some credibility in controlling it or has to pull back with higher interest rates? And that's not in my base case scenario, but I do think it's a risk we should be prepared for.
A couple of other topics I want to touch on with you, Mark. A lot of talk about new high-end tax increases. President Biden had been talking about them impacting people with incomes over $400,000, but the White House just clarified that and said it would be $200,000. As you sort of mentioned, most people, or a lot of people who earn $200K, probably think of themselves as middle or upper middle class. If the goals here are both fairness and generating revenue, is $200,000 of income the right place to put that dividing line?
Well, I think the mistake is to have a dividing line in the first place. Look, people can think of themselves as whatever class they want, but if you're making $200,000 as a single person, you're in the top 5% of single earners. If you're making $400,000 as a family, I think you're in the top 3%. These folks are doing very well, and may not feel like you're doing as well in places like New York City and San Francisco. It's still plenty of money to live off of, to save off of, to pay for college, and so they should pay more. But frankly, smart tax reform shouldn't draw these arbitrary lines, because it's going to result in bad policy. We should aim for progressivity. We should have a goal that the wealthier you are, the more you pay. But this idea that somebody making $399,000 is different than someone making $401,000 is a little bit silly.
Finally, Mark, we're seeing some really rosy economic reports following the passage of the American Rescue Plan. Goldman Sachs thinks the economy could grow 7 or 8% over last year, would be a huge spike, and another 5% possible next year. The Federal Reserve thinks unemployment could drop to 4.5% by the end of the year. Do you agree with those rosy estimates? And is this just a sugar rush from the stimulus like we sort of saw from the Trump tax cuts, or is this something more sustainable? And also, other than the virus, what could knock the economy off that pace?
I think the Goldman numbers are a little bit ambitious, but not totally crazy. And the Fed numbers are very reasonable. We could get 6, 7, even 7% growth this year and very low unemployment. The size of the economy at the end of this year will be a level that's sustainable, but the composition may not. We may still be in the world that we're sort of overinflated in some pandemic sectors, and underutilizing others. The question is what happens from there. If the economy keeps growing beyond that, it is possible we'll get sort of above our long-term sustainable potential. And then we're going to face a choice between a hard landing, a bit of a crash from the sugar high later, or an effort to keep the sugar high going through more and more deficit spending. And while that might feel good in the long term, we all know what happens, when you finally quit that sugar.
Yes, we do, usually with embarrassing results. Marc Goldwein is the Senior Policy Director for the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Marc, some great insights. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And up next, we shift to the COVID pandemic. We'll speak with ABC News Chief Medical Correspondent Dr. Jen Ashton. The doctor will discuss those worrying new variants, the difference in the available vaccines, and more.